Know what's funny about people who inherit everything? They assume the rest of us got lucky. My future son-in-law said it to my face, standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday evening in October, holding a glass of my good bourbon like he owned the place. We just want the wedding to feel elevated, Richard. You understand. He said my name the way you'd say the help. And I understood perfectly. I just didn't say so. My name is Richard Cho. I came to the United States from South Korea in 1989 with $400, a suitcase, and an uncle who let me sleep on his couch in Flushing, Queens. I spent my first 3 years in America washing dishes, delivering dry cleaning, and studying English from a cassette tape I played so many times the ribbon stretched out. I didn't complain. I'd seen worse. By 1997, I owned a single dry cleaning shop in Fairfield County, Connecticut. Nothing fancy. A narrow storefront with a broken awning and a parking lot that flooded every spring. But it was mine. I put my name on it. Sterling Clean. And I worked it 7 days a week for 4 years straight. My wife, the love of my life, God rest her soul, she ran the counter while I operated the machines in the back. We raised our daughter, Lily, in the apartment above the shop. By the time Lily graduated from Boston University, Sterling Clean had grown into a commercial laundry and textile services company, serving hospitals, hotels, country clubs, and corporate office campuses across New England and the Mid-Atlantic. 41 contracts, 260 employees, 11 facilities. Revenue that would make my younger self faint. People in the industry knew the name. Business people in Connecticut knew the name. Lily knew what the name meant. But apparently my future son-in-law Bradley Whitfield III did not, or didn't think it mattered. Bradley came from Darien, Connecticut. Old suburb money, the kind that doesn't talk about money because it was never earned in any single generation's memory. His grandfather had been a bond trader. His father was a partner at a white shoe law firm in Manhattan. Bradley himself worked in private equity, which is a polite way of saying he moved other people's money around and took a percentage. He was 34. He wore a different watch every time I saw him, and he had the handshake of a man who has never once worried about making rent. He met Lily at a charity gala in Greenwich. She'd gone with a girlfriend from work. He'd gone because his firm bought a table. They dated for 2 years. He was polished and attentive, and he made her laugh. I wanted to like him. I tried to like him. There were moments early on when I almost did. The first sign came the previous spring, when Bradley and Lily sat me down at my dining room table to discuss the wedding. Lily had a folder. Bradley had opinions. The venue would be the Orchards at Westport, a private estate that booked weddings at 18 months out. The guest list would be around 200. The budget, mostly covered by me since I insisted, was approximately $90,000. There's just one thing we wanted to run by you, Lily said carefully, glancing at Bradley. She had that look she used to get as a child when she'd broken something and was working up to admitting it. Bradley leaned forward with a smile that had clearly been practiced. Richard, we've been going through the guest list, and we think it makes sense to keep things curated. Curated. Like a museum. What does that mean, curated? It means we want the room to feel cohesive. Lily's moving into a new chapter. My family has a certain circle, and we want the evening to reflect that. He paused. Some of your contacts from the business world might feel out of place in that setting. I looked at my daughter. She looked at the folder. I asked him to be specific. He was. Over the next 30 minutes, Bradley walked through the revised list with the confidence of a man who had never once considered that the person across from him might know something he didn't. Gone. My longtime accountant, James Park, who'd helped me negotiate every major contract for 22 years. Gone. Doug and Patricia Hemmings, who ran the hotel supply company that was my largest client. Gone. Pastor Solomon and his wife from my church, who had fed me during lean years and prayed at my wife's funeral. Gone. My friend and former employee Sam Kwan, who now owned 3 commercial properties in Bridgeport and had quietly lent me $40,000 in 2001 when a machine breakdown almost sank us. They're important to me, I said. Of course they are, Bradley said. But this is about the overall guest experience. Mixing different social worlds at a wedding can create uncomfortable dynamics. I'm sure you understand. I nodded slowly. That particular kind of slow nod that my warehouse managers recognized as a warning sign. I understood. The refinements didn't stop there. In July, Bradley suggested I consider updating my wardrobe for the rehearsal dinner. He sent me a link to a tailor in Westport. Nothing wrong with your usual look, he said. But you'll be meeting some people who, well, first impressions matter. In August, he mentioned, almost as an aside, that his mother preferred guests not discuss trade at the dinner table, meaning business. My business. The business that was writing the check for his wedding. In September came the seating chart. I found myself at table 11, the kind of table positioned near the catering kitchen, where the noise from the swinging doors would compete with the toasts. Lily showed it to me herself, quietly, over coffee. She didn't say anything. She just turned the chart toward me and watched my face. I kept my expression neutral. It's fine, I told her. Dad. It's fine, sweetheart. Tell me about the flowers. She looked at me for a long moment. She has her mother's eyes. Then she turned the chart back around. The October Tuesday I mentioned. That was the night everything shifted. Bradley stopped by alone, which was unusual. He had a glass of my bourbon in his hand within 5 minutes. He sat across from me and explained, with the patient tone of someone explaining traffic rules to a tourist, that the rehearsal dinner would be attended by several of his father's law partners, a sitting state senator, and 2 managing directors from a hedge fund in Greenwich. These are people who operate at a certain level, Richard. I just want to make sure the evening flows without any rough patches. What kind of rough patches? Conversations that go sideways. People who don't know how to read a room. He swirled the bourbon. I know you've built something here. That's admirable, truly. But this crowd speaks a different language. I asked him what language that was. He actually said it. He actually leaned back in my chair, in my kitchen, drinking my liquor, and said, the language of real capital. Old relationships, institutional trust. He smiled. Not every successful person is fluent in it, and that's completely fine. It's just a different world. I set my own glass down. Bradley, what do you think my company does? He gave me the look you give a child who asks where rain comes from. Laundry services. Industrial cleaning. A slight pause. It's a solid niche. A solid niche. Sterling Clean held the linen contracts for 4 of the largest hotel brands operating in New England. We serviced 8 hospital systems. Our corporate clients included 3 Fortune 500 companies with regional offices in Connecticut and Massachusetts. We had laundered the linens at the Orchards at Westport, his wedding venue, for 11 years. The event manager there, a woman named Claire, still called me personally when they had overflow volume and needed a rush turnaround. I had Claire's cell phone number saved under Orchards Claire. I had a lot of numbers saved. I didn't share any of that with Bradley. I refilled his glass, smiled, and told him I appreciated his perspective. He left looking satisfied. I sat in my kitchen for a while after he drove away. The photo of my wife was on the shelf by the window. The one from our trip to the Oregon coast, 2 years before she got sick. I looked at it for a long time. Then I called my attorney. Then I called Nees Park, the accountant Bradley had removed from the guest list. James had a contact at the Connecticut Department of Banking. And James, as it happened, had been receiving some unusual calls over the past several months about a private equity fund managed by Bradley's firm, Whitfield Capital Partners. I told James to look into it quietly. I told him I had 48 hours. What he found did not surprise me. It disappointed me, which is different. Whitfield Capital Partners had raised a regional investment fund, $12 million from Connecticut-based investors, many of them retirees and small business owners. The fund was marketed as a conservative real estate income vehicle. The filings described moderate, stable returns. The actual investments, as James's contact discovered through public records, and one well-placed question to a former associate, were almost entirely in speculative development projects in secondary markets. Risky bets dressed up in conservative language. 3 of the projects had already stalled. The SEC's regional office in Boston had opened a preliminary inquiry 3 months earlier. Bradley's firm was under review, and Bradley personally had signed the fund disclosure documents. He was potentially facing a securities enforcement action. He was marrying Lily in 6 weeks. He had not told her any of it. I sat with that for a full day before I did anything else. I walked around my facility in Bridgeport. I talked to my shift supervisor. I had lunch with Sam Kwan, who knew without my saying much that something was wrong. Then I went home and I thought about my daughter. The problem with loving a person the way I love Lily is that you want to protect them from everything, including the truth. But the truth was that she was about to sign a marriage license with a man who was potentially facing federal securities enforcement and had hidden it from her. A man who had spent a year quietly erasing her father from the edges of her new life. I wasn't going to protect her from that. That would be the worst thing I could do. I called her on a Thursday morning. I asked her to come over that evening, just the 2 of us. "Is everything okay, Dad? I need to show you something. It's important." She was quiet for a moment. "Does it involve Bradley?" "Yes." Another pause. "Yes." Another pause. "I'll be there at 6. Before she arrived, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Claire at the Orchards at Westport. We talked for about 12 minutes. She was apologetic but thorough. The venue contract for the Whitfield Cho wedding would need to be reviewed in light of certain policy considerations related to undisclosed legal proceedings involving one of the contracting parties. The deposit, my deposit, would be returned in full within 10 business days. The second call was to the general manager of the Grand Harborview Hotel in Mystic, where Bradley had booked the rehearsal dinner. Sterling Clean had handled their linens for 9 years. The GM, a careful man named Robert, listened to what I had to say and told me he would need to verify some information before confirming event bookings associated with parties under active regulatory review. He was sorry for the inconvenience. I told him I appreciated his professionalism. The third call was to my attorney, who sent a letter that afternoon to Bradley's firm, formally requesting disclosure of any pending regulatory or enforcement proceedings prior to a significant financial commitment. Specifically, a $90,000 wedding by an affiliated family member. By the time Lily knocked on my door that evening, the venue had confirmed the cancellation. The rehearsal dinner location was pending review, and Bradley had received a letter from my attorney that I suspected had aged him 5 years and 30 minutes. Lily sat at the kitchen table, and I laid out what James had found. Slowly. In order. I didn't editorialize. I showed her the fund filings. I showed her the SEC inquiry documents that James's contact had obtained through legitimate channels. I showed her the projection materials that Whitfield Capital had distributed to investors alongside the actual investment allocations. She didn't say anything for a long time. She read everything twice. "How long have you known?" she asked. "James started looking 4 days ago. I didn't know until yesterday." "And the venues?" I told her about the calls. She looked at the table. Was that the right thing to do, Dad?" It was a fair question. I'd asked myself the same thing. "I don't know if it was right," I said. "I know it was honest, and I know that a man who hid a securities investigation from the woman he's marrying was going to hide other things too." "I didn't want you standing at an altar not knowing," she cried. Not dramatically, quietly. The way she'd cried at her mother's funeral. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and she sat up straight. "He took you off the guest list," she said. "He did. And James. And Sam. And Pastor Solomon. Yes. He put you near the kitchen. Table 11. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Then she stood up and walked to the window, the same window where my wife's photo sits. She stood there for a minute. "I knew something was wrong," she said finally. The last 4 months, whenever I asked about his firm, he'd changed the subject. I thought he was stressed about work. I didn't push because I didn't want to seem like I didn't trust him. She turned around. That's not a good sign, is it? No. That I didn't push. You trusted him. That's not a flaw. She looked at me with her mother's eyes. Did you like him? Even at the beginning? I told her the truth. There were moments early on when I almost did. She called Bradley that night from my kitchen. I gave her privacy. I walked out to the back deck and looked at the yard, the same yard where Lily had a swing set 30 years ago. I could hear the rise and fall of her voice, but not the words. The call lasted 21 minutes. When she came back out, she sat next to me on the deck steps. We didn't say anything for a while. He admitted it, she said. He said he'd been managing it, that it would resolve before the wedding, that it wasn't as serious as the documents made it look. She paused. He also said that whoever gave me that information was trying to sabotage his family and my future. He meant me. He meant you. She leaned her head on my shoulder for a moment, like she used to when she was small. He said you'd always resented him, that you couldn't stand seeing me move into a world you didn't belong in. I thought about the bourbon, the watched face, the language of real capital. What did you say to that? I asked. I said that my father built a company that launders the sheets at his wedding venue, employs 260 people, and apparently has enough relationships in this county to cancel an event with one phone call. She lifted her head, and then I told him we needed to take some time. I put my arm around her. She let me. 3 days later, Bradley's firm received the formal inquiry letter from the SEC's Enforcement Division. It had been pending for months. My attorney's letter to the firm had simply accelerated the timeline for disclosure. The Whitfield Capital Fund was suspended from new investments while the inquiry proceeded. 4 articles appeared in Connecticut business publications over the following 2 weeks. Bradley's father issued a statement through the law firm, calling the inquiry a routine regulatory matter. Bradley called me once during that period. It was a Saturday morning. I was at the facility reviewing the weekend schedule. You did this, he said. He didn't say hello. Good morning, Bradley. Don't. You pulled strings and you got my venue cancelled and you went digging into my business. You had no right. I had every right to investigate the man my daughter was about to marry. Any father would. You went after my firm, my reputation. You hid a federal securities inquiry from my daughter for 3 months. Silence. You know what you are, he said. You're a dry cleaner who got lucky. That's all. I let the words sit there for a moment. Bradley, the facility I'm standing in processes 40,000 pounds of commercial linen per week. We service 8 hospital systems. We hold contracts with 4 hotel brands. We've employed the same core team for an average of 14 years. I built that from a 400-square-foot shop in Fairfield County, starting with $400 and a cassette tape. I paused. I don't think that's luck. He hung up. Lily broke the engagement 6 days later. She called me afterward, and she sounded exhausted but clear. The way you sound when you've made a hard decision you know is right. He cried, she said. He said I was throwing away our future because of my father's interference. What did you say? I said my father's interference was the only reason I found out the truth before I said I do. She was quiet for a moment. He also said his mother never thought I was the right fit, that his family had certain expectations, and I'd never quite met them. I thought about the seating chart. Table 11, near the kitchen doors. His mother was probably right, I said. You're not the right fit for that. You're better. She laughed, a real one, the first I'd heard in weeks. Over the following months, the SEC inquiry concluded with a consent order and a civil penalty against Whitfield Capital Partners and against Bradley personally. He was barred from managing investor funds for 3 years. He did not face criminal charges, but the civil findings were public record and they were detailed. The investors in the fund received a partial recovery through a settlement. Not enough. It never is. Sterling Clean's legal team, at Lily's suggestion, helped connect two of the smaller investors, a retired school principal from Glastonbury and a couple who had owned a hardware store in New Haven, with a consumer advocacy attorney. It wasn't my money they'd lost, but it was my industry, in a manner of speaking. People who work hard and save carefully and trust the wrong people with it. I knew something about working hard and saving carefully. The orchards at Westport, as it turned out, reached out to us 6 months later about expanding our linen contract. Claire apologized for the awkwardness of the cancellation situation and said she hoped there were no hard feelings. I told her absolutely not. Business is business, and relationships are relationships, and sometimes they're the same thing. Sam Kwan came to dinner in December, along with James Park and Pastor Solomon and his wife. Doug and Patricia Hemmings brought a bottle of wine that was better than anything Bradley would have served at table 1. We ate in my kitchen, in the same chairs where my daughter had once sat watching a man explain to her father that he spoke a different language, that he moved in different circles, that some people were important and some people weren't. I cooked the short ribs. They weren't refined. They were excellent. Lily joined Sterling Clean the following February as Director of Client Relations. She had an MBA and she was restless and she wanted to build something. She came in one morning, looked at the client portfolio and said, "Dad, we should be in the senior living market. The linen turnover volume alone is significant, and half of these facilities are understaffed on the service side." She was right. We signed our first senior care contracts by summer. One morning in spring, we were driving to visit a prospective client, a new assisted living community in Westport, as it happened, and Lily was in the passenger seat reviewing the proposal. She looked up at one point and said, "You know what I've been thinking about? Tell me." I spent almost 2 years letting Bradley make me feel like where I came from was something to manage, something to apologize for, and I never said anything to you because I thought you wouldn't understand. She looked out the window. "But you already knew, didn't you?" I kept my eyes on the road. "I knew, and you waited. I waited until I had something to show you. Not just a feeling. Evidence." She nodded slowly. "Evidence." She nodded slowly. "That's the most Korean dad thing you've ever done." I laughed. She laughed. It was a good morning. The Whitfield family, from what I understand, still lives in Darien. Bradley relocated to somewhere in the mid-Atlantic to rebuild his career in financial consulting. His mother, I'm told, attended a charity luncheon in Greenwich last fall and mentioned to a mutual acquaintance that her son had made some professional missteps, but that the family name would endure. It probably will. Names like that tend to endure whether they've earned it or not. Sterling Clean's name endures too. Different reasons. I think about what Bradley said to me sometimes, the part about luck and the part about different worlds. He wasn't entirely wrong that different worlds exist. He was just wrong about which one I lived in. I live in the world where you show up every day and do the work and treat the people around you like they matter, because they do matter, and because someday you might need them and they might need you. And that's not a transaction, that's just how a life works, if you're paying attention. The people he called unimportant, the accountant and the pastor and the man who lent me $40,000 when my back was against the wall, those were the people who built this. Everything I have, every contract and every facility and every employee and every honest dollar came from relationships that Bradley Whitfield III would have put at table 11. I hope wherever he landed, he learned something. I genuinely do. Grudges are heavy, and I've been carrying things long enough to know what it costs to hold on to weight you don't need. But I'll tell you what I don't carry anymore. I don't carry any doubt about what I built, or who built it with me, or what it was worth. My daughter knows. That's enough. I've thought about what Bradley said to me. That last phone call, the Saturday morning one where he didn't bother saying hello. "You're a dry cleaner who got lucky." He meant it as an insult. I took it as a kind of confession, because a man who reduces 30 years of daily work, of hard decisions, of people trusted and relationships earned, down to luck. That man has never actually built anything. He's only ever inherited it or taken it, and somewhere in him he knows the difference, which is exactly why it bothered him so much that I existed. I didn't set out to dismantle Bradley Whitfield's life. I want to be clear about that. I made 3 phone calls to venues where I had standing relationships built over years of honest service. I asked my accountant to look into public records. I hired no one. I threatened no one. I simply used what I had. And what I had was a reputation I'd spent 3 decades earning one contract, one delivery, one kept promise at a time. The consequences that followed were the natural result of Bradley's own choices meeting the real world he'd been insulated from his whole life. That's the part people miss when they hear a story like this. They think the revenge is the phone calls. It isn't. The real reckoning was always going to come for Bradley, with or without me. The SEC inquiry had been open for months before I knew his name. The investors he'd misled were already counting their losses. I didn't create any of that. I just made sure my daughter wasn't standing at an altar when it arrived. Lily asked me once if I thought I'd done the right thing. I told her I didn't know if right was the correct word. I knew it was honest. I knew it was necessary. And I knew that a man who hides the truth from the woman he claims to love while quietly positioning himself to access her family's assets was not going to become a different person after the wedding. He was going to become a harder problem. Here's what I've come to understand, not as philosophy, but as plain observation from 50-odd years of being alive and paying attention. The way a person treats what they didn't earn tells you everything about who they are. Bradley didn't earn his family name, his education, his network, or his confidence. None of that is a crime. But he also didn't earn Lily's trust, and he spent it anyway. He didn't earn the retirement savings of a school principal from Glastonbury, or a hardware store couple from New Haven, and he spent those too. That pattern of spending what isn't yours doesn't stop on its own. It just finds new things to spend. Integrity isn't a personality trait you're born with. It's a practice. It's what you do when no one's watching, when it costs you something, when the easier path is right there and you choose the harder one anyway. I watched my wife do it for 30 years. I tried to do it myself, and I raised a daughter who, when the moment came, sat at my kitchen table and read every page of evidence and said, I need to know everything. Not tell me it isn't true, not I want to believe him. She asked for the truth, and then she acted on it. That took more courage than anything I did. It took more courage than anything I did. Sam Quan once told me, years ago when we were both younger and broker, that the only real currency is what people think of you when you're not in the room. Bradley thought I wasn't in the room. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about a lot of things. But I don't carry anger about it anymore. Anger is weight. And I've carried enough weight in my life to know it slows you down. I carry something else instead. I carry the memory of Lily in the passenger seat that spring morning reviewing a client proposal and saying, "You already knew, didn't you?" And I carry the way she laughed when I said the most Korean dad thing I'd ever done was wait for evidence before I spoke. That one is worth everything.